The crystal chandelier above the grand ballroom cast dancing shadows across 500 perfectly dressed guests, as my sister Victoria glided across the marble floor in her $20,000 gown. The string quartet played softly from their elevated platform, while servers in crisp white uniforms weaved between tables laden with imported orchids and gold-rimmed china. I watched it all unfold from my folding chair in the hotel corridor, positioned directly next to the service elevator and the emergency exit sign that flickered intermittently above my head. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Alexandra Chen, and 3 hours earlier, I had discovered that my own sister had seated me in the hallway of the Ritz-Carlton because she was embarrassed by my presence at her wedding. What Victoria didn't know, what none of my family knew as they celebrated inside that opulent ballroom, was that in exactly 18 months I would be featured on the cover of Fortune magazine as the youngest woman to build a billion-dollar company from nothing. The same family who had spent years treating me like an embarrassing failure would soon be calling my assistant begging for meetings, interviews, and most pathetically money. Sometimes the sweetest revenge comes not from planning it, but from simply refusing to stay small when others mourned it. The morning of Victoria's wedding began like most interactions with my family, with a carefully orchestrated reminder of my place in the Peterson family hierarchy. I stood in the bridal suite of the Ritz-Carlton, Seattle, watching my sister transform into what our mother had always called the golden child, while I remained perpetually cast as the disappointing afterthought who never quite measured up to family expectation. Victoria sat before an ornate vanity mirror while 3 professional stylists worked to perfect her appearance for what she had repeatedly called the most important day of my entire life. Her auburn hair was being arranged into an elaborate updo that required approximately 40 bobby pins and enough hairspray to damage the ozone layer. The makeup artist applied foundation with the precision of a Renaissance painter, while the manicurist made final adjustments to nails that had been shaped, buffed, and polished to perfection over the past week. The bridal suite itself resembled a luxury spa more than a hotel room, with cream-colored walls adorned with gold leaf accents, plush carpet that probably cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Elliott Bay. Flower arrangements featuring white roses, peonies, and baby's breath occupied every available surface, filling the air with a fragrance so sweet it was almost overwhelming. "Alexandra, could you please move away from the mirror?" Victoria said without looking at me, her tone carrying the particular brand of irritation she reserved for moments when my existence inconvenienced her carefully planned life. "The photographer needs to capture the getting ready process without any distractions in the background." I stepped back from where I had been standing near the window, recognizing the familiar pattern of being edited out of family moments for aesthetic reasons. Victoria's wedding photographer, a renowned professional who charged $5,000 per day, continued capturing artistic shots of the bride's preparation while I became invisible furniture that needed reposition. Our mother, Patricia Peterson, bustled around the suite with the energy of a woman orchestrating a military campaign. She wore a navy blue mother-of-the-bride dress that had been custom-tailored to her specifications and cost more than most people spent on their entire wedding wardrobe. Her silver hair was styled in the elegant chignon she favored for important social occasions, and her jewelry consisted of the pearl set that had belonged to her mother and grandmother before her. "Victoria, darling, remember to keep your shoulders back during the ceremony," Patricia instructed while adjusting the train of the wedding dress for the 100th time that morning. "The photographer from Seattle magazine will be taking pictures for their society pages, and posture is everything in formal photography." Seattle magazine had indeed sent a photographer to document what they were calling the social event of the season. Victoria's engagement to Preston Whitfield had been featured in their pages 6 months earlier, complete with a full-page spread, showing the happy couple at various charity galas and cultural events throughout the city. The article had described Preston as scion of the prominent Whitfield banking family, and Victoria as rising star in Seattle's philanthropic community, though her philanthropy consisted primarily of attending fundraising luncheons and having her picture taken with large donation checks. Preston Whitfield represented everything our family valued: old money, social connections, and the kind of respectable career that looked impressive in wedding announcements. His family had founded Whitfield and Associates Investment Banking in 1892, and their client list included some of the Pacific Northwest's most established fortunes. Preston himself was 32 years old, Harvard-educated, and possessed the kind of bland handsomeness that photographed well at society events without threatening anyone's sense of superiority. "Alexandra, could you help me with my jewelry?" Victoria asked. Though her tone suggested this was more of a command than a request, she gestured toward a velvet-lined box containing the diamond necklace and earrings that had been Preston's wedding gift to her. The set had reportedly cost $80,000 and featured stones that sparkled with the kind of brilliance that money could buy but couldn't quite mask the coldness behind Victoria's eyes. I moved to assist with the necklace clasp, noting how the diamonds felt heavy and cold against my fingers. Victoria watched my reflection in the mirror with the expression she wore when forced to acknowledge my existence during family gatherings. We had never been close, despite being only 2 years apart in age, but the distance between us had grown exponentially since Victoria's engagement had transformed her into the family success story, while I remained the cautionary tale. "Are you planning to say anything embarrassing during the reception?" Victoria asked as I fastened the necklace. "Mother mentioned that you might want to give a speech, but I think it would be better if you just enjoyed the celebration quietly." The suggestion that I might embarrass the family through public speaking was particularly painful because it referenced the disaster of our cousin Jennifer's wedding 2 years earlier. I had attempted to give an impromptu toast that had included several personal anecdotes about our shared childhood, but my nervous energy and lack of experience with formal speaking had resulted in a rambling monologue that had made several family members visibly uncomfortable. The incident had become family legend, frequently referenced whenever someone wanted to remind me of my tendency toward social awkwardness. "I wasn't planning to give a speech," I replied, stepping back to admire how the necklace complemented Victoria's dress. The wedding gown itself was a masterpiece of European craftsmanship, featuring hand-sewn beadwork, and a train that required 2 people to manage properly. Victoria had spent 18 months selecting the perfect dress, visiting boutiques in New York, Los Angeles, and even Paris before settling on this creation by a designer whose name I couldn't pronounce but whose reputation commanded reverence from everyone involved in wedding planning. "Good," Victoria said with relief. "This day needs to be perfect, and we can't afford any unexpected surprises or awkward moments." Our mother appeared beside us with a checklist that she had been consulting obsessively for the past 6 months. Patricia Peterson approached wedding planning with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made her a formidable force in Seattle's social charity circuit. Every element of Victoria's wedding had been researched, compared, and selected based on criteria that included not just aesthetic appeal but also social appropriateness and potential for creating the right kind of impression on the guest list. "The photographer wants family portraits in 10 minutes, Patricia announced, checking her gold watch with the precision of someone coordinating a space launch. "Victoria, your lipstick is perfect. Alexandra, you might want to touch up your makeup before we begin." I glanced at my reflection in the mirror, noting that my makeup looked perfectly adequate for a family wedding, but apparently insufficient for photographs that would be preserved for posterity and potentially published in Society magazine. My dress, a burgundy bridesmaid gown that Victoria had selected for its ability to complement her color scheme without competing for attention, fit well and was appropriately formal for the occasion. However, in the context of the bridal suite's luxury and the other bridesmaids' professional styling, I looked like someone who had prepared herself rather than someone who had been prepared by a team of experts. The other bridesmaids began arriving to complete their final preparations for the family portraits. Victoria had chosen 6 bridesmaids, each selected for their ability to enhance the wedding's visual appeal and social significance. There was Madison, Victoria's college roommate from University of Washington, who now worked in public relations for a major tech company. Caroline, her sorority sister who had married into Seattle's real estate development elite. Jessica, Preston's sister who served as the diplomatic bridge between the two families, and 3 others whose primary qualifications seemed to be their photogenic qualities and their ability to afford the expensive bridesmaid dresses and associated wedding weekend costs. Each bridesmaid had spent the morning in professional hair and makeup sessions that had begun at 6 a.m. Their dresses, which had cost $400 each plus alterations, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. We're identical in color but varied slightly in style to accommodate different body types while maintaining visual cohesion. The overall effect was that of a carefully curated display designed to showcase Victoria's excellent taste in friends and her ability to orchestrate aesthetic perfection. "Ladies, let's gather for family photos," called James Morrison, the wedding photographer whose portfolio included celebrity weddings and whose artistic vision commanded respect throughout the Pacific Northwest. He positioned us in the suite's sitting area, which offered optimal lighting and a backdrop that suggested luxury without being ostentatious. The family portrait session revealed the practiced choreography of people accustomed to being photographed for social purposes. Victoria naturally commanded the center position, with Preston appearing handsome and composed beside her. Our parents flanked the couple with expressions of pride and satisfaction that suggested their investment in this wedding was yielding appropriate return. The bridesmaids arranged themselves according to height and complementary coloring, while Preston's family contributed their own version of old money elegance to the composition. I found myself positioned at the edge of most group shots, either partially hidden behind other family members or cropped to the margins where my presence wouldn't interfere with the central narrative of Victoria's perfect day. This positioning wasn't accidental. Patricia had spent considerable time during the previous day's rehearsal explaining optimal photo arrangements that would ensure the most flattering results for everyone involved. "Alexandra, could you angle yourself slightly to the left?" James instructed during one particularly complex family grouping. "We want to make sure everyone is visible but not competing for focal attention." The phrase, "not competing for focal attention," perfectly summarized my role in most family gatherings. I was expected to be present enough to fulfill family obligations, but not prominent enough to detract from the family members whose achievements and social connections were considered more valuable for the Peterson family brand. After 45 minutes of photography during which multiple outfit changes were required for different family combinations, we moved toward the final preparations for the ceremony itself. Victoria's dress required assistance from 3 people to navigate the suite's doorway, and her train needed constant attention to prevent wrinkles or damage during transport to the hotel's grand ballroom. The Ritz-Carlton Seattle had been selected specifically for its reputation as the city's premier venue for society weddings. The grand ballroom featured 20-foot ceilings with elaborate molding, crystal chandeliers that had been imported from Austria, and parquet floors that had been polished to mirror brightness for the occasion. The space could accommodate 500 guests while maintaining an intimate atmosphere that suggested exclusivity rather than excess. Victoria's ceremony decorations had transformed the ballroom into what wedding magazines would describe as a sophisticated blend of classic elegance and modern luxury. White roses and peonies were arranged in towering centerpieces that reached nearly 6 feet in height, while thousands of white candles created romantic lighting that would photograph beautifully during the evening reception. The altar area featured an arch of white flowers and greenery that framed the couple perfectly for both the ceremony and the professional photography that would document every moment. "The ceremony begins in 30 minutes, Patricia announced, consulting her timeline with the precision of someone managing a Fortune 500 company merger. "Everyone needs to be in position for the processional in 25 minutes. Alexandra, you'll be walking with Jeremy, Preston's college friend." Jeremy Peterson was a perfectly acceptable groomsman who worked in finance and possessed the kind of unremarkable pleasantness that made him suitable for escorting family members down wedding. He was 29 years old, conventionally attractive, and had been briefed on the importance of maintaining appropriate pace and posture during the procession. Our pairing had been determined through careful consideration of height compatibility and the visual aesthetics of the overall bridal party arrangement. The bridal party gathered in the hotel's preparation area, which offered privacy for final adjustments and last-minute coordination before the ceremony began. Victoria's dress required final steaming to eliminate any wrinkles that had developed during transportation, while her makeup artist made touch-ups to ensure camera-ready perfection throughout the proceedings. "Remember, everyone walks slowly and keeps their bouquets at the appropriate height," instructed Caroline Walsh, the wedding coordinator whose services cost $8,000 but who earned every penny through her ability to manage complex logistics. while maintaining an atmosphere of serene celebration. The photographer needs time to capture each couple as they proceed down the aisle. The processional music began precisely at 4 o'clock, with the string quartet playing a classical arrangement that Victoria had selected after auditioning dozens of musical options. The ballroom doors opened to reveal 500 guests who represented the Peterson and Whitfield families' combined social and professional network. The guest list read like a directory of Seattle's established elite, including business leaders, political figures, cultural institution board members, and several families whose names appeared regularly in the society pages. As I walked down the aisle beside Jeremy, I surveyed the assembled crowd and recognized the faces of people who had been fixtures in my family's social life for decades. There was Dr. Margaret Hamilton, who served on multiple hospital boards with our mother. Robert Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, who owned several prominent restaurants and had catered numerous Peterson family events. The Williamson family, whose daughter had been Victoria's maid of honor in a wedding 2 years earlier that had established the social precedent for this level of celebration. The ceremony itself unfolded with the polished perfection that months of planning and professional coordination could achieve. Victoria and Preston exchanged vows that they had written themselves, but which sounded remarkably similar to other society wedding vows I had heard at similar events. The officiant, a family friend who had performed wedding ceremonies for several prominent Seattle families, delivered remarks that struck the appropriate balance between religious significance and social celebration. Preston slipped the wedding ring onto Victoria's finger with practiced grace, having rehearsed this moment multiple times during the previous week's preparation session. The ring itself was a masterpiece of jewelry craftsmanship, featuring a 5-carat diamond surrounded by smaller stones and set in platinum that had been designed specifically for Victoria by a jeweler whose clients included several celebrity couples. "You may kiss the bride," announced the officiant, and Preston complied with a kiss that was passionate enough to satisfy romantic expectations, but restrained enough to maintain dignity in front of 500 guests and multiple photographers. The ballroom erupted in applause that lasted nearly a minute, while camera flashes captured the moment from multiple angles for posterity. The recessional proceeded flawlessly, with the newly married couple leading the bridal party back down the aisle, while the string quartet played a triumphant classical piece that Victoria had selected for its combination of celebration and sophistication. Guests threw rose petals instead of rice, creating a romantic visual effect that would look spectacular in the professional photographs. The cocktail hour began immediately following the ceremony, with guests moving to the hotel's terrace area where servers offered champagne, wine, and an elaborate selection of hors d'oeuvres that had been prepared by the Ritz-Carlton's executive chef. The menu featured items like smoked salmon on brioche points, beef tenderloin with horseradish cream, and vegetarian options that accommodated various dietary preferences while maintaining presentation standards appropriate for the occasion. During cocktail hour, I attempted to mingle with guests and participate in the celebration, like a normal family member. However, conversations consistently reminded me of my position as the Peterson family member, whose achievements didn't warrant much discussion. When people asked about my work, their polite interest quickly faded when I explained that I was developing technology solutions for small businesses rather than pursuing the kind of high-profile career that generated social conversation material. "Alexandra, how lovely to see you," said Miss Eleanor Whitfield, Preston's grandmother and the matriarch of the banking family dynasty. "What are you doing with yourself these days?" "I'm working on technology projects that help small businesses improve their operations," I replied, offering the simplified explanation that I had developed for social situations where detailed technical descriptions would be inappropriate. "How nice," Miss Whitfield replied with the kind of polite dismissal that indicated technology work fell outside her understanding of worthwhile career pursuits. "Victoria mentioned that you're quite the computer person. That must be very useful for the family." The characterization of my work as being quite the computer person perfectly captured how my family discussed my professional activities when they discussed them at all. The complex software solutions I was developing, the business strategies I was implementing, and the market opportunities I was pursuing were reduced to vague references about computers and technology that suggested competence without importance. As cocktail hour progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated from conversations that focused on topics I couldn't meaningfully contribute to. Discussions about vacation homes in Aspen, private school selections for children, and charity board positions assumed levels of wealth and social connection that I hadn't achieved. My attempts to engage with these conversations often resulted in polite acknowledgement followed by subtle redirection toward people whose experiences were more relevant to the group's interests. The situation reached its nadir when I discovered my seating assignment for the reception dinner. Caroline Walsh, the wedding coordinator, approached me with a clipboard and an expression that suggested she was delivering news that required diplomatic handling. "Alexandra, there's been a small adjustment to the seating arrangements," Caroline said with the kind of professional cheerfulness that wedding coordinators used to deliver potentially problematic information. "We've had to accommodate some last-minute changes to the guest list, so you'll be seated at table 12. Table 12 was located in what could generously be described as the ballroom's overflow area, positioned behind a decorative column that partially obscured the view of the head table where Victoria and Preston would be dining with their wedding party and immediate family. The table was clearly intended for guests whose presence was obligatory but whose comfort and visibility were not priorities for the evening's social dynamics. "Is table 12 inside the ballroom?" I asked, though something about Caroline's expression suggested I might not like the answer. "Well, it's in the corridor area just outside the main ballroom," Caroline explained with the kind of careful phrasing that event planners used to make undesirable situations sound like design choices. "It offers a more intimate setting and you'll still be able to hear everything that's happening during the reception." I stared at Caroline for several seconds, processing the reality that my own sister had seated me in the hotel corridor for her wedding reception. The location wasn't a mistake or an oversight, it was a deliberate decision that someone had made about where I belonged in the hierarchy of wedding guest importance. "I'm seated in the hallway?" I asked, wanting to confirm that I had understood correctly. "It's a lovely spot with easy access to the restrooms and the bar," Caroline replied, maintaining her professional demeanor while delivering information that would have been insulting if applied to almost any other family member. "The acoustics are actually quite good, so you won't miss any of the important moments." The absurdity of the situation crystallized in that moment. I was 26 years old, had been working 18-hour days for the past 2 years developing technology that would eventually revolutionize how small businesses operated, and my own family had literally seated me in a hallway because they were embarrassed by my presence at a social event. I walked toward table 12 to confirm the reality of my seating assignment, hoping that perhaps Caroline had been mistaken or that I had misunderstood the location. However, the table was exactly where she had described, in the corridor outside the main ballroom, positioned between the service elevator and an emergency exit sign that cast a red glow over the white tablecloth. The other guests signed table 12 appeared to be a carefully selected collection of people whose presence was required but whose prominence was not desired. There was Great Aunt Ruth, who was 93 years old and had a tendency to tell inappropriate stories about family members who had died decades earlier. Cousin Mark, who worked in insurance and whose wife had recently left him for his business partner. Preston's uncle Theodore, who had been involved in a minor scandal involving campaign contribution irregularities, but whose exclusion would have created family tension. The table setting was identical to those in the main ballroom, featuring the same fine china, crystal glasses and silver flatware that Victoria had selected after months of comparison shopping. However, the location made it clear that while we would receive the same meal as the important guests, we would experience the celebration from a position that emphasized our peripheral status in the evening's social hierarchy. I sat down at my assigned seat and surveyed the corridor that would be my vantage point for my sister's wedding reception. Hotel staff moved efficiently through the space, carrying trays and coordinating service for the main ballroom. The emergency exit sign buzzed occasionally, creating an ambient soundtrack that competed with the string quartet music filtering from the celebration I could hear but barely see. The absurdity of the situation struck me with sudden clarity. Here I was, dressed in an expensive bridesmaid gown, having spent my morning helping my sister prepare for the most important day of her life, only to discover that she had seated me in a hotel corridor because my presence was somehow embarrassing to her and our family. At that moment, watching hotel staff navigate around our corridor table while the sounds of laughter and celebration drifted from the ballroom where I wasn't welcome, I made a decision that would change everything. I stood up from my folding chair, picked up my purse and walked toward the hotel's main entrance without looking back. The cool Seattle evening air hit my face as I exited the Ritz-Carlton, and for the first time in hours I felt like I could breathe freely. I had spent 26 years accepting my family's assessment of my worth, allowing them to minimize my achievements and marginalize my presence at important events. But something about being seated in a hallway at my own sister's wedding had finally broken the spell of family obligation that had kept me accepting treatment I would never tolerate from strangers. I took out my phone and called an Uber, then sent a simple text message to my mother: "Had to leave early. Emergency with work. Hope the rest of the evening goes beautifully." As I waited for my ride, I thought about the work that was waiting for me at home. While my family had been focused on wedding planning and social positioning, I had been developing software that was already generating revenue and attracting attention from investors who understood its potential. The technology I was creating wasn't just computer work as my family dismissively described it. It was a revolutionary approach to business operations that could transform entire industry. The Uber arrived, and as we drove away from the Ritz-Carlton, I watched the hotel's elegant facade disappear in the side mirror. Inside that building, my family was celebrating Victoria's perfect wedding without any apparent awareness that their treatment of me had been unacceptable. They would probably notice my absence eventually, but I suspected it would be with relief rather than concern. What none of them knew was that their dismissal of me as the family disappointment was about to become the most expensive mistake they would ever make. The technology I was developing, the business I was building, and the investors I was attracting were going to create opportunities that would transform not just my life, but the entire landscape of the industry I was entering. I had spent my entire life being told that I wasn't good enough, smart enough, or successful enough to deserve respect from my own family. But as the Uber carried me away from Victoria's perfect wedding and toward the work that was waiting for me, I realized that their opinion of my worth was completely irrelevant to what I was capable of achieving. The game was about to change completely, and for the first time in my life, I was going to be the one making the rules. The Uber dropped me off at my Capitol Hill apartment at 8:30 that evening, and I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my modest one-bedroom unit, still wearing the burgundy bridesmaid dress that had cost more than my monthly rent. The contrast between the luxury I had just left and the simplicity of my living space felt stark but somehow liberating. My apartment might have been small and furnished primarily with items from secondhand stores, but it was mine, and more importantly, it was where I was building something that would matter. I kicked off the expensive heels that had been pinching my feet for the past 6 hours, and immediately felt more grounded. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the 3 computer servers I had installed in what was supposed to be a dining area. The servers ran continuously, processing data and testing algorithms for the software platform that consumed most of my waking hours and all of my financial resources. My living room doubled as my primary workspace, with 2 large monitors mounted on adjustable arms above a desk I had built myself from reclaimed wood and industrial pipe legs. The setup looked improvised compared to the corporate offices where most software development happened, but it functioned perfectly for the kind of intensive programming and system design that my project required. The walls were covered with whiteboards where I had sketched out database architectures, user interface designs, and business process flows that represented months of analysis and planning. To most people, the diagrams would have looked like incomprehensible technical drawings, but to me, they represented a vision for transforming how small businesses manage their operations, inventory, customer relationships, and financial planning. I changed into comfortable clothes and made a cup of coffee, then settled at my workstation to continue the programming session I had abandoned that morning to attend Victoria's wedding preparations. The code I was writing addressed a fundamental problem that millions of small business owners faced every day: the inability to afford enterprise-level software solutions that could streamline their operations and provide the kind of data analysis that larger companies took for granted. Most small businesses operated with a patchwork of different software tools that didn't communicate with each other effectively. They might use one program for accounting, another for inventory management, a third for customer relationship management, and various spreadsheets to try to coordinate everything. The result was inefficiency, data silos, and missed opportunities that collectively cost small businesses billions of dollars annually and lost productivity and revenue. My platform, which I had named Nexus Operations, was designed to integrate all of these functions into a single, affordable system that could adapt to different types of businesses while providing sophisticated analytics and automation capabilities. The technical challenges were substantial, requiring expertise in database design, user interface development, cloud infrastructure, security protocols, and artificial intelligence algorithms that could learn from business patterns and suggest optimization. I had been working on Nexus operations for nearly 2 years, investing every dollar I could save into server infrastructure, software licenses, and the occasional consultation with specialists whose expertise exceeded my own. The project had consumed my social life, strained my family relationships, and required me to live on a budget so tight that I often ate rice and beans for weeks at a time to afford necessary technical resources. The financial sacrifices had been worth it because the software was beginning to demonstrate capabilities that exceeded my original projection. Early beta testing with a handful of small businesses had shown productivity improvements, averaging 23%, cost reductions of 15% on average, and customer satisfaction improvements that translated directly into increased revenue for the businesses using the platform. More importantly, the beta testing had revealed market demand that was far larger than I had initially estimated. Small business owners who experienced the platform's capabilities became enthusiastic advocates who referred other businesses and provided feedback that helped me refine the system's functionality. Word was spreading through business networks, and I was receiving inquiries from companies across multiple industries who wanted access to software that could provide enterprise-level capabilities at small business prices. As I worked through the evening, implementing security enhancements that would allow the platform to handle sensitive financial data, I reflected on the contrast between my family's perception of my work and the reality of what I was building. To them, I was quite the computer person who spent too much time on technical projects that weren't serious career pursuits. To the business owners who were using my software, I was creating tools that were transforming their operations and improving their profitability in measurable ways. The phone rang at 11:15. Interrupting my concentration on a particularly complex database optimization algorithm. The caller ID showed my mother's number, and I debated whether to answer. Patricia Peterson's calls after family events typically involved lengthy discussions about social dynamics, family obligations, and various ways I had failed to meet expectations during important occasions. I let the call go to voicemail and continued working. But the phone rang again 5 minutes later. Then again. By the fourth call, I realized that my early departure from the wedding reception had created a situation that required immediate attention. "Hello, Mother," I said, answering the fifth call with resignation. "Alexandra, what on earth happened tonight?" Patricia's voice carried the particular combination of anger and embarrassment that she reserved for moments when family members had behaved in ways that reflected poorly on the Peterson family reputation. "You disappeared from Victoria's wedding without explanation, leaving everyone wondering what had happened to you. I sent you a text message explaining that I had a work emergency," I replied, which was technically accurate, even if the emergency had been my realization that I could no longer tolerate being treated like a second-class family member. "A work emergency during your sister's wedding reception." Patricia's tone suggested that she found this explanation completely inadequate. What kind of work emergency could possibly justify leaving family celebrations without proper goodbye? I considered explaining the reality of my seating assignment and how it had felt to discover that I had been positioned in a hotel corridor like an unwanted obligation. However, previous experience had taught me that complaints about family treatment were typically dismissed as oversensitivity or misunderstanding of family dynamics. Technical issues with my software platform that required immediate attention, I said instead. "I'm sorry if my departure caused any inconvenience during the reception." "Inconvenience?" Patricia repeated with exasperation. "Victoria was asking about your whereabouts during the toasts, and I had to explain to multiple guests that you had suddenly vanished for mysterious reasons. It was embarrassing." "Alexandra, These events require family unity and support. The irony of being lectured about family unity after being seated in a hallway was not lost on me, but I recognized that discussing the seating arrangement would only escalate the conversation into territory that wouldn't benefit anyone. I understand that my departure was disruptive, I said diplomatically. I hope the rest of the evening went smoothly for Victoria and Preston. The evening was beautiful, Patricia confirmed, her tone softening slightly as she shifted from criticism to social reporting. The reception was absolutely elegant, and everyone commented on how lovely Victoria looked. The photographer captured some wonderful moments, and Preston's family was very complimentary about our arrangement. As my mother described the social success of Victoria's wedding reception, I continued working on the security protocols that would protect customer data when Nexus operations launched publicly. The contrast between her focus on social appearances and my focus on building something that created genuine value for people highlighted the fundamental difference in our priority. Mother, I'm glad the evening was successful for Victoria, I said, saving my progress and preparing to end the conversation. I need to return to work now, but please give my congratulations to Victoria and Preston. Alexandra, about your work, Patricia said, her tone becoming more serious. I think we need to discuss your priorities and how they affect your family relationships. You've been spending so much time on computer projects that you seem disconnected from family events and social obligations. The characterization of my work as computer projects that interfered with family obligations revealed how completely my mother misunderstood what I was building. To her, my software development was a hobby that had gotten out of hand rather than a serious business venture that could transform industries. My work is important to me, I replied carefully. I'm building something that has the potential to help thousands of businesses improve their operation. I'm sure your projects are interesting, Patricia said with the kind of dismissive tone parents used when discussing children's unrealistic ambitions. But you're 26 years old, and it's time to consider more practical career paths that provide stability and social connection. Victoria's success with Preston demonstrates the benefits of focusing on relationships rather than isolated technical pursuits. The comparison to Victoria's success was particularly painful because it reduced my sister's achievements to her ability to marry well, rather than acknowledging any personal accomplishment. More troubling was the implication that my technical work was inherently less valuable than social networking and relationship building. I appreciate your concern, I said, recognizing that further discussion would not bridge the gap between my mother's worldview and my actual goal. I should let you get back to wedding celebrations. After ending the call, I returned to my programming with renewed determination. The conversation had reminded me why I needed to succeed spectacularly rather than moderately. My family's dismissal of my work wasn't just annoying. It was symptomatic of broader cultural assumptions about what kinds of achievements deserved respect and recognition. I worked until 3 a.m, implementing security features that would allow Nexus operations to handle multi-million-dollar business transactions with bank-level protection. The technical challenges were substantial, requiring integration of encryption protocols, authentication systems and audit trails that would satisfy regulatory requirements across multiple industries. The following Monday, I received a phone call that would accelerate my timeline considerably. The caller was Marcus Rodriguez, a venture capital partner at Cascade Ventures, who had been referred to me by one of my beta testing clients. Cascade Ventures was a mid-sized investment firm that specialized in technology companies with high growth potential, and Marcus had a reputation for identifying breakthrough opportunities before they became obvious to larger investors. Alexandra, I've been hearing interesting things about your software platform from several business owners in our investment portfolio, Marcus said after introducing himself. Would you be available to meet this week to discuss your company's development and funding needs? The conversation that followed was unlike any business discussion I had experienced. Marcus asked detailed questions about the technical architecture of Nexus operations, the market size for integrated business management software, my customer acquisition strategies, and the competitive landscape I was entering. His questions demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both the technical challenges I was solving and the business opportunities those solutions could create. Based on what I'm hearing, Marcus said, Near the end of our phone conversation, you've identified a significant market inefficiency and developed technology that addresses it more effectively than existing solutions. I'd like to schedule a formal presentation where you can demonstrate the platform's capabilities and discuss expansion plans. We arranged to meet the following Thursday at Cascade Ventures' downtown Seattle offices. The meeting would be my first opportunity to present Nexus operations to serious investors who had the resources to fund rapid growth and national expansion. I spent the week preparing a presentation that would convey both the technical sophistication of my platform and the business opportunity it represents. The challenge was translating complex software capabilities into language that non-technical investors could understand while providing enough detail to demonstrate that I had solved genuinely difficult problems. The presentation materials included financial projections, showing how Nexus operations could capture market share from existing business software providers, technical documentation proving that the platform could scale to support thousands of simultaneous users, and case studies from beta clients, demonstrating measurable improvements in business performance. Thursday morning, I arrived at Cascade Ventures offices, wearing my most professional outfit and carrying a laptop loaded with demonstration data that would showcase the platform's capability. The offices occupied 2 floors of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, with conference rooms featuring panoramic views of Elliott Bay, and meeting spaces designed to facilitate the kind of high-stakes discussions that determined which technology companies received funding. Marcus Rodriguez met me in the lobby, and his appearance confirmed his reputation as someone who understood both technology and business strategy. He was approximately 40 years old, with the kind of confident demeanor that came from successfully evaluating hundreds of investment opportunities. His handshake was firm, and his questions during our elevator ride to the conference room demonstrated that he had researched my background and the market I was entering. "Before we begin," Marcus said as we settled into the conference room, "I should mention that I've invited 2 of my partners to join us. Rebecca Chen handles our software investments, and David Park specializes in companies that are ready for rapid scaling." Rebecca Chen and David Park entered the conference room with the kind of focused energy that venture capital partners brought to potentially significant investment opportunity. Rebecca had a background in software engineering before transitioning to investment analysis, while David's expertise included business development and market strategy for technology companies. The next 90 minutes represented the most important business conversation of my life. I demonstrated Nexus operations capabilities using real data from beta clients, showed how the platform integrated functions that typically required multiple software systems, and explained the artificial intelligence algorithms that learned from business patterns to suggest operational improvements. "This is impressive," Rebecca said after watching the platform automatically identify inventory optimization opportunities for a retail client. "You've essentially created enterprise resource planning software that small businesses can afford and actually use effectively. The market opportunity is substantial," David added, reviewing the financial projections I had prepared. Small businesses represent approximately 99% of all businesses in the United States, but most business software development focuses on enterprise clients because of higher profit margins. Marcus leaned back in his chair, clearly processing the implications of what he had seen. "Alexandra, what kind of funding are you seeking, and what would you use the investment to achieve?" I had spent considerable time preparing for this question, researching comparable companies and calculating the resources needed to transform Nexus operations from a promising startup into a market leader. The answer required balancing ambition with realism, demonstrating that I understood both the opportunity and the challenges. "I'm seeking $8 million in Series A funding," I said, presenting the financial model I had developed. The investment would support hiring additional developers, expanding server infrastructure, implementing enterprise-level security and compliance features, and scaling customer acquisition across multiple markets. The number was larger than I had ever imagined discussing, but my research had shown that successful software companies required substantial initial investment to build the infrastructure and team necessary for rapid growth. Underfunding typically led to gradual market entry that allowed competitors to copy successful features and eliminate early advantages. $8 million is a significant investment for a company at your stage, Rebecca observed, though her tone suggested interest rather than skepticism. What gives you confidence that Nexus operations can achieve the growth rates necessary to justify that level of funding? I had anticipated this question and prepared detailed evidence based on beta client performance and market research. The data showed customer retention rates above 90%, average productivity improvements that paid for the software cost within 6 months, and referral rates that suggested strong word-of-mouth marketing potential. The fundamentals are exceptionally strong, I explained, displaying charts that showed customer satisfaction metrics and usage patterns. Beta clients are not only renewing their subscriptions, but expanding their usage and referring other businesses. The platform creates measurable value that translates directly into customer loyalty. David Park studied the customer data, with particular attention to the referral patterns and expansion metrics. These numbers suggest that customer acquisition costs could be very low if word-of-mouth marketing is effective. That would create a significant competitive advantage over companies that rely on expensive marketing campaigns. The meeting continued for another hour, covering technical architecture, competitive analysis, regulatory considerations, and growth strategies. The venture capital partners asked sophisticated questions that tested my understanding of both the technology I had built and the market I was entering. Alexandra Marcus said as the formal presentation concluded, "We're very interested in Nexus operations and impressed with what you've accomplished. I'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting next week where we can discuss terms and timeline for potential investment." The conversation that followed was surreal. These experienced investors were treating my work with the kind of respect and seriousness that my family had never shown. They understood the technical challenges I had solved, appreciated the market opportunity I had identified, and recognized the business potential of what I was building. As I left the Cascade Ventures offices, I felt a combination of excitement and vindication that was difficult to process. The same work that my family dismissed as computer projects was being evaluated by sophisticated investors as a potential industry transformation that deserved millions of dollars in funding. The following week brought a series of developments that accelerated beyond anything I had anticipated. Cascade Ventures presented a term sheet offering exactly the $8 million I had requested, with conditions that were more favorable than I had expected. The investment would give them a 30% equity stake while allowing me to maintain control of the company's direction and operation. More significantly, the term sheet included provisions for additional funding rounds that could support national expansion and international market entry if Nexus operations achieved specific growth milestones. The total potential investment could reach $50 million over 3 years, with valuation increases that would make my equity stake worth tens of millions of dollars. I spent the weekend reviewing the term sheet with a lawyer who specialized in venture capital agreements, and by Monday morning I was ready to accept the investment offer. The funding would transform Nexus operations from a one-person startup operating from my apartment into a technology company with the resources to compete with established software providers. The first priority was hiring additional developers who could help me scale the platform's capabilities and implement enterprise features that would attract larger business clients. I had identified several talented programmers through professional networks, and the investment funding would allow me to offer competitive salaries that could attract top-tier talent. The second priority was expanding server infrastructure to support thousands of simultaneous users across multiple time zones. The current setup in my apartment could handle the beta testing load, but national expansion would require cloud-based infrastructure with redundancy and security features that met enterprise standards. Within 2 weeks of accepting the investment, I had signed a lease for office space in South Lake Union, Seattle's technology district where companies like Amazon and Google had established major operations. The space included room for 20 employees initially, with expansion options that could accommodate rapid growth. The transformation was happening faster than I had imagined possible. 3 weeks after being seated in a hallway at my sister's wedding, I was running a funded technology company with serious investors and genuine prospects for industry impact. The irony was not lost on me that while my family had been focused on social positioning and traditional markers of success, I had been building something that would soon provide me with more wealth and influence than any of them had achieved through conventional career paths. I had not spoken to Victoria or my parents since the night of the wedding, but I knew that word would eventually reach them about Nexus operations and the investment from Cascade Venture. Seattle's business community was small enough that significant funding announcements typically generated attention from local media and professional networks. As I worked late into the evening in my new office space, surrounded by whiteboards covered with expansion plans and hiring strategy, I thought about the conversation that would eventually happen when my family discovered what I had been building while they dismissed my work as unimportant computer project. The software that my mother had characterized as interfering with family obligations was about to generate more wealth than the Peterson family had accumulated through generations of conventional business success. The technical expertise that Victoria had found embarrassing was becoming the foundation for a company that could transform entire industry. I had spent my entire life accepting my family's assessment that I was the disappointing daughter who lacked the social skills and conventional ambitions necessary for real success. But as I looked around the office that would soon house a team of brilliant developers working on technology that could help millions of businesses operate more effectively, I realized that their opinion of my potential had been spectacularly wrong. The game was changing, and I was finally playing by rules that recognized the value of what I could create rather than the limitations that others had tried to impose on my ambition. Victoria's perfect wedding had been a celebration of traditional success markers that my family understood and respected. My success would be measured in different terms, but the impact would be far more significant than anything they had achieved. In 6 months, when Nexus operations launched publicly and began capturing market share from established software companies, my family would discover that the daughter they had seated in a hallway possessed capabilities they had never bothered to recognize. The revelation would reshape not just our family dynamics, but their understanding of what kinds of achievements deserved respect and recognition. The sweet revenge was not something I had planned or pursued deliberately. It was simply the natural consequence of refusing to accept limitations that others tried to place on my potential and choosing to build something that mattered rather than seeking approval from people who couldn't understand what I was creating. 6 months after Victoria's wedding, I stood in the boardroom of Nexus Operations headquarters overlooking Elliott Bay, preparing for the media conference that would announce our public launch and Series B funding round. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, and the morning sunlight cast long shadows across the polished conference table where reporters from TechCrunch, Forbes and the Wall Street Journal were setting up recording equipment. The transformation had been extraordinary even by technology industry standards. Nexus Operations now employed 47 people across engineering, sales, marketing, and customer success teams. Our client base had grown to over 3,000 small businesses spanning retail, restaurants, professional services, and manufacturing. Most importantly, we had achieved something that established software companies had struggled with for decades, creating enterprise-level functionality that small businesses could afford and actually use effectively. The numbers spoke for themselves. Average customer productivity improvements of 31%, cost reductions averaging 22% across all client categories, customer retention rates of 94%, with expansion revenue growing 40%, quarter over quarter. These metrics had attracted attention from major investors who understood that we weren't just another software company but a fundamental disruption to how business operations were managed. Marcus Rodriguez from Cascade Ventures stood beside me reviewing the presentation materials one final time. The Series B funding round had closed the previous week at a valuation that still seemed surreal when I thought about it. $250 million. My personal equity stake, which had started as a dream in my Capitol Hill apartment, was now worth approximately $175 million on paper. The media interest has been incredible, Marcus observed, gesturing toward the reporters who were testing microphones and adjusting camera angles. When Forbes decided to make this their cover story, it elevated the announcement beyond typical technology industry coverage. The Forbes cover story was scheduled to publish the following Monday with the headline, "The 27-year-old who's revolutionizing small business technology." The article would detail my journey from wedding rejection to industry transformation, though the writer had focused more on the business strategy and market impact than the personal motivation behind my determination to succeed. Rebecca Chen from our investment team approached with the latest customer acquisition data that we would be announcing during the media conference. The numbers exceeded our most optimistic projections: 1,500 new business customers in the past month alone, with referral rates that suggested organic growth acceleration that could sustain expansion without traditional marketing expenses. Alexandra, the Fortune magazine journalist, just arrived, Rebecca informed me, nodding toward a woman in her 30s who was setting up interview equipment in the corner of the boardroom. She wants to discuss the cover story they're planning for next month's issue about women transforming technology industry. The Fortune cover story would be even more significant than the Forbes article because it would position Nexus operations within the broader context of technology companies that were reshaping entire economic sectors. The magazine had indicated that my story would be featured alongside profiles of other female entrepreneurs who had built billion-dollar companies from innovative ideas that established players had initially dismissed. As the media conference began, I found myself reflecting on the contrast between this moment and the humiliation I had experienced at Victoria's wedding. 6 months ago, my own family had considered me an embarrassment who needed to be hidden in hotel corridors during important social events. Today I was being celebrated by national business media as an innovator whose work was transforming how millions of businesses operated. The first question came from the TechCrunch reporter who had been following Nexus operations since our initial funding announcement. Alexandra, when you started developing this platform, did you anticipate that it would disrupt the business software industry to this extent? I had prepared for this question by thinking carefully about the balance between confidence and humility that would resonate with both media audiences and potential customers. I recognized that small businesses were underserved by existing software solutions, but the speed of adoption and the measurable impact on business performance has exceeded even my most optimistic projections. The market was ready for this kind of integrated solution. The Wall Street Journal reporter followed with a question about competitive responses from established software companies. Microsoft, Oracle, and Salesforce have all announced small business initiatives since your platform gained market attention. How do you maintain competitive advantages against companies with substantially larger resources? This question addressed one of the most critical challenges facing Nexus operations as we scale. Large software companies had the resources to copy our features and undercut our pricing, but they also had organizational structures and customer bases that made it difficult for them to serve small businesses effectively. Our competitive advantage isn't just technological, I explained. It's understanding how small businesses actually operate and building solutions that integrate seamlessly into their existing workflow. Large enterprise software companies excel at serving Fortune 500 clients, but they struggle to create products that work for businesses with 5 employees and limited technical resources. The questions continued for nearly an hour, covering everything from technical architecture to expansion plans, to the regulatory challenges of handling financial data for thousands of businesses. Each question provided an opportunity to demonstrate that Nexus Operations wasn't just a promising startup, but a mature technology company with sophisticated capabilities and clear vision for industry leadership. The Forbes journalist asked about the personal journey that had led to Nexus Operations, and I chose to share a carefully edited version of my motivation that would resonate with readers without making the story primarily about family conflict. I've always been interested in solving problems that affect real people's daily lives, I said. Small business owners work incredibly hard but often lack access to the tools that could make their operations more efficient and profitable. Building technology that democratizes those capabilities feels like meaningful work. The answer was true even if it didn't capture the full emotional complexity of proving wrong people who had dismissed my potential. The satisfaction of success was amplified by the knowledge that my achievements would eventually reach the family members who had treated me as an embarrassment, but the primary motivation remained creating something that provided genuine value to customer. After the media conference concluded, I returned to my office to review the customer feedback that our success team collected daily. The messages from business owners who were using Nexus operations to transform their operations provided constant reminder of why the work mattered beyond personal vindication or financial return. A restaurant owner in Portland had written to explain how the platform's inventory management features had reduced food waste by 35% while improving menu planning and cost control. A retail shop in Denver reported that automated customer relationship management had increased repeat business by 48%. A manufacturing company in Ohio described how integrated financial planning had helped them secure a loan for expansion that their bank had initially rejected. These stories represented the real impact of Nexus operations, enabling small businesses to operate with the same sophisticated tools and analytical capabilities that large corporations took for granted. The technology was leveling a playing field that had been skewed toward companies with substantial resources for decades. My assistant knocked on the office door with news that would accelerate the timeline for family confrontations significantly. "Alexandra, your mother called the main number and asked to schedule a meeting with you. She said it was regarding family business that required immediate discussion." Patricia Peterson had not contacted me directly since the phone call on Victoria's wedding night, though I had heard through mutual acquaintances that my parents were aware of Nexus operations' success and my rising profile in Seattle's business community. The request for a meeting suggested that my family had decided to address the situation directly rather than continuing to pretend that my achievements weren't relevant to family dynamics. I scheduled the meeting for the following Thursday at our downtown office, curious to see how my mother would navigate the conversation about my success after months of dismissing my work as unimportant computer project. The setting would be significant. Patricia would be visiting the headquarters of a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, meeting with a daughter whose personal wealth now exceeded the Peterson family's accumulated asset. Thursday afternoon arrived with unseasonably warm weather for November in Seattle. I dressed carefully in a tailored suit that projected professional authority without being ostentatious, and I prepared talking points that would allow me to be gracious while making clear that the power dynamics between us had shifted fundamentally. Patricia Peterson arrived precisely on time, wearing a designer dress and carrying the leather handbag that she reserved for important social occasions. Her expression suggested nervous determination, as if she had rehearsed the conversation multiple times, but remained uncertain about how it would unfold. The lobby of Nexus Operations headquarters was designed to convey both innovation and stability, with modern furniture, technology demonstrations, and awards from industry publications displayed prominently. Patricia spent several minutes examining the space with the kind of attention she typically reserved for evaluating other families' homes during social visits. "Alexandra, this is very impressive," she said as I escorted her toward the executive conference room. "I had no idea that your company had grown to this scale." The comment revealed how completely my family had misunderstood what I was building during the 2 years I had been developing Nexus operations. They had known I was working on technology projects, but they had never bothered to investigate what those projects actually involved or what they might become. We settled into the conference room with coffee, and Patricia began the conversation with the kind of diplomatic approach she used for navigating sensitive social situations. "Alexandra, I want to apologize for the way things ended at Victoria's wedding. I realize now that there may have been miscommunications about seating arrangements and family expectations." The characterization of my corridor table assignment as miscommunications about seating arrangements was classic Peterson family conflict management, acknowledging that something had gone wrong while avoiding direct responsibility for deliberate decisions that had caused harm. "The wedding was beautiful," I replied diplomatically. "I hope Victoria and Preston are enjoying married life. They're doing wonderfully," Patricia confirmed, then shifted toward the primary purpose of her visit. "Alexandra, I've been reading about your company in business publications, and I'm amazed by what you've accomplished. I had no idea that your technology work was so significant." The admission that she had no idea about the significance of my work highlighted the fundamental problem with our family relationship. For 2 years, I had been building something that would transform entire industries, but my family had been so focused on traditional markers of success that they had completely missed what was happening in their own midst. "Thank you," I said simply. "It's been rewarding work." Patricia leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. I think I owe you an apology that goes beyond wedding seating arrangements. Your father and I didn't understand what you were building, and we may have been dismissive of work that was actually quite remarkable. The apology was more direct than I had expected, though it still framed their dismissal as misunderstanding rather than willful disregard for my capabilities and achievements. However, it represented acknowledgement that their assessment of my potential had been wrong. I appreciate that, I replied. It's important to me that my family understands what Nexus Operations represents. Could you help me understand? Patricia asked. I've read the newspaper articles, but I'd like to hear from you what this company does and why it's been so successful. I spent the next 30 minutes explaining Nexus Operations in terms that a non-technical person could understand, focusing on the business problems we solved and the measurable impact we created for customers. Patricia listened with the kind of focused attention she typically reserved for important social information, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated genuine interest in understanding my work. This is extraordinary, she said after I finished the explanation. You've essentially created technology that helps small businesses compete with larger companies by giving them access to the same kinds of tools and analysis. That's exactly right, I confirmed. The platform democratizes capabilities that were previously available only to companies with substantial technology budgets. Patricia was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing the implications of what she had learned. When she spoke again, her tone carried a mixture of pride and regret that suggested she was reconsidering not just my achievements, but her entire approach to evaluating success. Alexandra, I realize now that your father and I have been measuring success using outdated criteria, she said carefully. We focused on traditional career paths and social connections while you were building something that's actually changing how business operates. The acknowledgement was significant because it suggested awareness that different types of achievements deserved recognition and respect. My family's emphasis on conventional success markers had blinded them to innovations that were creating genuine value in the world. Different paths can lead to meaningful outcomes, I agreed diplomatically. I have another confession, Patricia continued, her expression becoming slightly uncomfortable. After the wedding, Victoria mentioned that you had been seated at table 12 and she felt terrible about it afterward. She said the seating arrangements had been handled by the wedding coordinator, but she should have been more attentive to making sure family members were appropriately placed. The explanation absolved Victoria of deliberate malice while acknowledging that the seating arrangement had been inappropriate. It was probably the closest thing to an apology I would receive for being placed in a hotel corridor during my sister's wedding reception. I understand that wedding planning involves complex logistics, I replied, choosing not to pursue the details of how such decisions had been made. Patricia nodded gratefully, then shifted toward what I suspected was the primary purpose of her visit. Alexandra, I hope that our past misunderstandings won't prevent you from remaining connected to family events and celebrations. Your success reflects well on all of us, and we want to be supportive of your achievement. The request for continued family involvement was predictable given that my success had transformed the social dynamic. Being associated with a daughter who had built a hundreds of millions-dollar company was considerably more appealing than being associated with someone whose work was dismissed as unimportant computer project. Family relationships are important to me, I said, leaving open the possibility of future involvement, while making clear that my priorities had evolved beyond seeking family approval. Wonderful, Patricia said with obvious relief. Victoria would love to have lunch with you soon to catch up and hear about your business directly, and your father is very interested in learning more about technology entrepreneurship. The sudden interest in my work from family members who had previously ignored it was amusing, but I recognized that successful relationships required accepting people's capacity to change their perspectives when presented with new information. We concluded the meeting with tentative plans for family dinner the following month, though I made clear that my schedule was increasingly demanding as Nexus Operations expanded into new markets. The conversation had accomplished its purpose, acknowledging that family dynamics needed adjustment to accommodate my changed circumstances. 2 weeks after Patricia's visit, Victoria called my office to request the lunch meeting that our mother had mentioned. The conversation was markedly different from our previous interactions, with Victoria approaching me as someone whose time and attention had value rather than someone whose presence was occasionally tolerated at family events. "Alexandra, I've been reading about Nexus operations everywhere," Victoria said when we met at a downtown restaurant. "I had no idea that what you were working on was so significant. Mother showed me the Forbes article, and it's incredible." Victoria had chosen a upscale restaurant near the financial district, perhaps recognizing that our conversation should occur in a setting that reflected my professional status rather than treating me like the little sister who needed guidance about life choices. "Thank you," I replied. "It's been an exciting journey. I owe you a sincere apology about the wedding," Victoria continued, her expression showing genuine regret. "The seating arrangements were completely inappropriate, and I should have paid closer attention to making sure family members were properly accommodated." The direct acknowledgement of the wedding seating problem was more than I had expected, and Victoria's willingness to take responsibility rather than blaming the wedding coordinator suggested that she had genuinely reflected on what had happened. "I appreciate the apology. The wedding was beautiful, and I hope you're enjoying married life." "We are," Victoria confirmed, then shifted toward curiosity about my business. "Can you explain what Nexus Operations actually does? I understand it's software for small businesses, but I'd love to understand the detail." I provided Victoria with a similar explanation to the one I had given our mother, focusing on the practical benefits that small businesses experienced when using our platform. Victoria listened attentively and asked questions that demonstrated she was making a genuine effort to understand my work rather than simply fulfilling social obligations. "This is remarkable," she said after I finished. "You've essentially created technology that gives small businesses the same advantages that large corporations have always had." "That's the goal," I agreed, leveling the playing field so that success depends more on business execution than on access to expensive technology. Victoria was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing the implications of my explanation. When she spoke again, her tone carried a mixture of admiration and what seemed like genuine regret about our previous relationship. "Alexandra, I realize that I've never really understood what you were capable of achieving," she said carefully. "I think I've been so focused on conventional success markers that I missed what you were building." The admission was significant because it suggested awareness that she had underestimated not just my achievements but my fundamental capability. Victoria had always been the golden child whose accomplishments were celebrated, while I had been treated as the family member whose potential was limited. "Different people have different strengths," I replied diplomatically. "Yes, but some strengths are more valuable than others," Victoria said with a slight smile. "Building a company that changes entire industries is considerably more impressive than organizing charity luncheons and marrying well." The self-deprecating comment about her own achievements was unexpected, and suggested that my success had prompted Victoria to reevaluate not just my potential but her own accomplishment. The comparison wasn't entirely fair, since Victoria had excelled within the framework of expectations that our family had established, but it revealed shifting perspectives about what kinds of achievements deserved recognition. We continued talking for nearly 2 hours, covering everything from technology trends to family relationships to our respective plans for the future. The conversation felt like the first genuine interaction Victoria and I had shared since childhood, with both of us approaching each other as equals rather than maintaining the family hierarchy that had defined our relationship for decades. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Victoria made a request that surprised me. "Alexandra, Preston and I are hosting a dinner party next month for some of his business contacts, and we'd love to have you join us. Several people have expressed interest in meeting you after reading about Nexus operations in the business press." The invitation represented a complete reversal of my position in family social events. 6 months earlier, I had been seated in a hotel corridor to avoid embarrassing the family. Now I was being invited to meet business contacts, as someone whose presence would enhance the gathering's prestige. "I'd be happy to attend if my schedule allows," I replied, recognizing that accepting the invitation would demonstrate graciousness while acknowledging the changed family dynamic. The following month brought developments that exceeded even my adjusted expectations for Nexus Operations' growth trajectory. We announced partnerships with 3 major business software distributors, who would market our platform to their existing customer base. Customer acquisition accelerated to over 2,000 new businesses per month. Most significantly, we received acquisition offers from Microsoft and Oracle that valued the company at over $1 billion. The acquisition offers created a decision point that would determine the future direction of both Nexus operations and my personal goal. Accepting either offer would provide immediate liquidity that would make me one of the wealthiest women in Seattle, but it would also mean surrendering control of the company to executives who might not maintain our focus on small business customers. After extensive discussions with our board of directors and investment partners, I decided to decline both acquisition offers and pursue additional funding that would support international expansion while maintaining our independence. The Series C funding round closed at a valuation of $1.2 billion, officially making Nexus Operations a unicorn company and establishing my personal net worth at approximately $800 million. The milestone generated significant media attention, including profile articles in Time magazine and Harvard Business Review about my journey from wedding corridor to billionaire entrepreneur. The narrative had evolved beyond technology industry coverage into broader cultural commentary about recognizing potential, supporting innovation, and questioning traditional assumptions about success. Victoria's dinner party took place the week after the Series C announcement, and the guest list reflected the social transformation that my success had created. The attendees included venture capital partners, technology executives, and business leaders, who treated me as someone whose insights and connections were valuable rather than someone whose presence required diplomatic tolerance. Preston Whitfield, who had barely acknowledged my existence during his wedding reception, approached me with questions about technology trends and investment opportunity. His transformation from polite dismissal to engaged interest perfectly captured how financial success altered social dynamics even among people who claim to value other qualities. Alexandra, I've been following Nexus Operations' progress with great interest, Preston said during cocktail hour. The growth trajectory has been extraordinary, and I'd love to discuss potential investment opportunities in other technology companies you might recommend. The conversation that followed revealed how completely my position in family and social networks had changed. Preston, who worked for a family banking firm that managed investment portfolios for wealthy clients, was essentially asking me to serve as a technology investment advisor because my track record suggested expertise that could benefit his business. Similar conversations occurred throughout the evening, with guests seeking my treated opinions on technology trends, startup investment strategies, and the future of business software market. The social dynamic had inverted completely. Instead of being marginalized or ignored, I was as the most interesting and valuable person in the room. The evening's most satisfying moment came when Patricia Peterson introduced me to a group of guests with obvious pride in my achievement. This is my daughter Alexandra, who founded Nexus Operations. Perhaps you've read about her company in Forbes or the Wall Street Journal. The introduction was everything I had imagined during the years when my family had dismissed my work as unimportant. Patricia was now eager to claim association with my success and use my achievements to enhance her own social standing. As the dinner party concluded, I reflected on the complete transformation of my relationship with the Peterson family. 6 months earlier, they had been embarrassed by my presence at social events. Now they were promoting my achievements and seeking ways to benefit from association with my success. The change in treatment was gratifying, but it also highlighted something important about the nature of respect and recognition. My family's newfound appreciation wasn't based on deeper understanding of my character or capabilities. It was based on external validation that my achievements were valuable according to criteria they understood and respected. The lesson was both satisfying and sobering. I had proven wrong the people who had underestimated my potential, but their recognition came only after my success became undeniable rather than from genuine appreciation of my abilities during the struggle to achieve that success. As I drove home from Victoria's dinner party, passing the Ritz-Carlton where I had been seated in a corridor during her wedding reception, I thought about how completely the story had been rewritten. The family that had treated me as an embarrassment was now celebrating my achievements and seeking association with my success. The sweet revenge was complete, but it had evolved into something more valuable than vindication. I had built something that mattered, created value for thousands of customers, and demonstrated that different types of intelligence and ambition deserved recognition and respect. More importantly, I had learned that other people's opinions of my potential were irrelevant to what I could actually achieve. The limitations they had tried to impose existed only as long as I was willing to accept them. Nexus Operations would continue growing, expanding internationally, and transforming how businesses operated across multiple industries. The company's success would generate wealth and influence that would reshape not just my life but the broader technology landscape. But the most important achievement wasn't financial or professional success, it was the knowledge that I had refused to stay small when others demanded it, chosen to build something meaningful rather than seeking approval from people who couldn't understand what I was creating, and proven that sometimes the sweetest revenge comes not from planning it, but from simply refusing to accept limitations that others try to place on your potential. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.